On today's show, we interview the best-selling author, the behavior designer, and the beautiful man who's been asked to speak on the campus of the Stanford School of Business and Design. Today's guest has successfully sold 2 technology companies since 2003. Today's guest is kind of a big deal. His name is Nir Eyal, and on today's show, he's going to teach us how to become indistractable.
Is that even actually a word?
Yeah, that's the word. He made up the word indistractable. On today's show, he's going to teach us how to gain control of our attention so that we can choose and design the life that we want to live.
So this is a great place to talk about what is distraction. The best way to understand what distraction is to understand what distraction is not. So the opposite of distraction, if you ask most people, think about it for a minute, what's the opposite of distraction? Most people will say it's focus, right? The opposite of distraction is focus. Not so fast. The opposite of distraction is not focus. The opposite of distraction is traction. And if you look at the origin of both words, they both come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull. And you'll notice they both end in the same 6 letters, A-C-T-I-O-N, that spells action. So traction is any action that pulls you towards what you want, things that you do with intent.
On today's show, he explains why email is killing your ability to get things done.
Now I'm going to stay focused.
Here we go.
I'm totally going to concentrate. I'm going to do what I said I'm going to do. I'm going to stop procrastinating. Here I go. I'm going to get to work. But first, let me check email.
Oh.
Right? Let me just do that one quick thing on my to-do list because it feels good to just, to get the momentum going, right?
Right.
Here's the thing. By definition, anytime you are not doing what you said you would do, that is a distraction.
Nir also shares on today's show why super successful people have a calendar. And they actually block out time to implement their calendar while the rest of the world simply does not.
In the 5 years it took me to write this book, I talked with hundreds of people. And there was one very surprising practice that everyone I talked to who didn't struggle with distraction did, and everyone who did struggle with distraction did not do. And that practice was to keep a well-defined schedule. And it turns out that 2/3 of Americans don't keep any sort of schedule whatsoever, and even the 1/3 who do, 99% of them don't keep it properly.
Some shows don't need a celebrity narrator to introduce the show, but this show does. 2 men, 8 kids, co-created by 2 different women, 13 multi-million-dollar businesses. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Thrive Time Show.
3, 2, 1, here we go!
Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, and we'll show you how to get here. Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, now we here.
Yes, 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 and yes! Thrive Nation, on today's show, our guest comes from near and far. Nir Eyal, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, real quick, let's start with your website domain. It's the most clever domain of all time. Can you tell the listeners what your website domain is so they can check you out while they're listening?
Sure, it's nirandfar.com, but Nir is spelled like my first name. I have a very unusual first name, N-I-R. And when I was growing up, one of the things that kids made fun of me for was my unusual name. They say Nir, like Nir and Far, and then I said, you know what? That's kind of catchy. I bet people will remember that if I turn that into my domain. So that's my domain. It's Nir and Far, but Nir spelled like my first name, N-I-R.
Do you have any brothers and sisters?
I do. I have 2 older brothers.
Are their names like Bobby and Carl or something like that, just to balance it out?
Exactly, Jim Bob.
Okay. So now you you've taught classes at Stanford, the Stanford Business School. I first heard about you when you wrote the book Hooked, which is really, some people in Silicon Valley have referred to it as kind of like the Bible of creating some of the technology we see today. You've also sold 2 technology companies. You've been a busy guy, but for the listeners out there that maybe aren't super familiar with your background, could you share kind of where you started and how you became a best-selling author?
Sure. So I'm what you call a behavioral designer. So I help companies build habit-forming products for good. So I've worked with companies like Kahoot, the world's largest educational software, to get kids hooked onto in-classroom learning. I've worked with the New York Times to get people hooked to reading the news. The book has been used by companies like Fitbod to get people hooked to exercising in the gym. So basically, I study the psychology of how products can build healthy habits in people's lives, and that's what I taught at Stanford for many years. And then more recently, I decided to look at the flip side of the fact that, sometimes products are so well designed that sometimes we want to overuse them, and sometimes they become quite distracting. And so that's what Indistractable is all about. I tell people the Achilles heel of how to put distracting things in their place. Not just our technology. Of course, people think about how distracting Facebook and Twitter and email and the iPhone and the news all are these days, but all sorts of distractions, right? Anytime we don't do what we say we're going to do, why don't we do those things? And so what I want to do is to help people get out from under those distractions so that they can control their attention and choose their life.
Now, I know some of our listeners out there are believers in the Judeo-Christian faith and some are not, but if it's okay, I'd like to start off at the beginning with Adam and Eve. We're going old school here. Okay, so here we go. Adam and Eve. With Adam and Eve, my understanding is that Adam knew clearly, do not eat from this tree. He knew it. You do not eat from this tree. But yet he got distracted, and as the Bible tells, Satan, comes down and tricks Eve, and the next thing you know, they're distracted. They forgot their purpose. Why do people get distracted?
So this is a great place to talk about what is distraction. The best way to understand what distraction is to understand what distraction is not. So the opposite of distraction, if you ask most people, think about it for a minute, what's the opposite of distraction? Most people will say it's focus, right? The opposite of distraction is focus. Not so fast. The opposite of distraction is not focus. The opposite of distraction is traction. That if you look at the origin of both words, they both come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull. And you'll notice they both end in the same 6 letters, A-C-T-I-O-N. That spells action. So traction is any action that pulls you towards what you want, things that you do with intent. Now, the opposite of traction is distraction. Any action that pulls you away from what you plan to do, anything that you are not doing with intent. So this is really important for 2 reasons. Number one, anything can be a distraction. Okay, so see if this rings a bell. So before I started this line of research, I used to sit down at my desk and I would say, okay, now I'm going to stay focused.
Here we go.
I'm totally going to concentrate. I'm going to do what I said I'm going to do. I'm going to stop procrastinating. Here I go. I'm going to get to work. But first, let me check email.
Oh.
Right? Let me just do that one quick thing on my to-do list because it feels good to just, to get some momentum going, right?
Right.
Here's the thing. By definition, anytime you are not doing what you said you would do, that is a distraction. And I argue that these simple distractions that we think are just let me just do that quick email, let me just do that quick thing real quick.
Boom, boom.
That turns out to be a much more pernicious form of distraction. It's much worse than, let's say you play Candy Crush or check Facebook or watch a YouTube video. You're slacking off at work if you're using those things, right? But when you check email instead of working on that big project, you are letting distraction trick you, kind of like Satan, you said earlier, trick you into prioritizing the urgent at the expense of the important. So anything can become a distraction, and conversely, anything can become traction. So it's not about exactly what you do. So a lot of tech critics that are all Chicken Little about, technology is melting your brain, it's addicting everyone, it's evil, this and that. That's rubbish. The scientific evidence doesn't show that it does any of this bad stuff if you use it according to your schedule, not the tech companies. So there's nothing wrong with playing a video game or enjoying a football game on TV or going on Facebook or YouTube. These tools are wonderful as long as you use them with intent, as long as you plan when to use them. So, okay, now we have 2 parts of this model. You got traction and distraction.
Got it.
Now the question, to answer what you asked earlier about, well, why do we get distracted in the first place? We have to understand what prompts us to traction or distraction. 2 things. We have external triggers, which are the pings, the dings, the rings, all of these things in our outside environment that leads us towards distraction. We'll get back in a minute to what you can do about those external triggers. That's where most people tend to blame. They tend to blame their iPhone, Slack, or some kind of ping or ding.
Yeah.
That certainly can lead us to distraction. But to my surprise, it is not the leading cause of distraction. The leading cause of distraction is not what is going on outside of us, but rather what is happening from within. that 2,500 years ago, believe it or not, Plato talked about this very same problem. That Plato, the philosopher, 2,500 years before the iPhone, talked about, boy, isn't the world such a distracting place these days? So this is not a new problem. And he asked this very important question of, why is it that despite knowing what to do, we don't do it? Right? Why do we do things against our better interests?
There we go. Yep.
Things that you know you should do, but you don't do. And you know, think about it. So Plato, he didn't have Google 2,500 years ago. You know, we have no excuse. It used to be that you could say, I don't know how to lose weight. I don't know how to eat right. I don't know how to do be better at my job. I don't know how to have a better relationship. But in this day and age, Google it. Just Google it. It's all there. And frankly, this is common sense. Who doesn't basically know how to have a better relationship? Be fully present with people. How to be better at your job. Do the work, especially the stuff that other people don't want to do. Lose weight. Come on, seriously. Does anybody really not know how to do these things? The problem is not that we don't know. The problem is that we can't stop getting distracted from doing the things we ourselves know we should do. Why? And wouldn't it be a superpower if we could just do what we said we are going to do? So this is really the meat and potatoes here. This is where we have to start. Why don't we do the things we say we should? And so the answer to Plato's 2,500-year-old question of why don't we do things against our better interests is that the real reason we get distracted is because of what we call the internal triggers. Internal triggers are uncomfortable emotional states that we seek to escape from. That in fact, everything you do for one reason only. Now, most people say, okay, well, why do we do what we do? They think there's two reasons. Carrots and sticks, pain and pleasure, right? That everything we do is about the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. This is what Bentham and Freud call the pleasure principle. Turns out that's not true. Everything you do for only one reason, and that is the desire to escape discomfort. Everything you do, even the pursuit of pleasurable sensations, is about the desire to escape discomfort. Think about this for a second physiologically, okay? So if you are cold, the brain says, oh, this is uncomfortable, put on a jacket. If you're hungry, the brain says, oh, these hunger pangs don't feel good, you should eat. So everything we do physiologically is about the desire to escape discomfort. The same holds true psychologically. When you're lonely, check Facebook. When you're uncertain, Google. When you're bored, check stock prices, sports scores, the news, Pinterest, Reddit. All these products and services cater to these uncomfortable internal triggers. So that means, the big summary here, to answer your question, it took me a while, but here we go. The answer to why we do everything we do is we do it to escape discomfort, which therefore means that time management is pain management. That any other technique you use, well, I don't care what guru you listen to, what productivity hacks, what productivity books you've read, none of that stuff works unless, first and foremost, we address this internal trigger, this desire to escape discomfort, which is the root cause of all procrastination and distraction. It's not a character flaw. It's our inability to cope with discomfort in a helpful rather than harmful manner.
There's a Napoleon Hill quote that I'd like to read to you here, that Napoleon Hill, the famous self-help author, back in the day, he once wrote, he said, the capacity to surmount failure without being discouraged is the chief asset of every person who attains outstanding success in any calling. The capacity to surmount failure without being discouraged is the chief asset of every person who attains outstanding success in any calling. I agree with that, and I would like to know, in your new book that you've written here, Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life, how can our listeners learn how to surmount short-term failure or setback? Because I know, like, when I sit down to write a book, the one thing I don't want to do as soon as I sit down is write the book. And so I encourage myself. I say motivational phrases like, Clay, would you like a nice warm glass of Shut the Hell Up? And I say, yes, I do want a glass of Shut the Hell Up. And then I sit down and write, and my wife will come down and she will hear me talking to myself. And she's like, what did you just say? I offered myself a nice warm glass of Shut the Hell Up. Or I have little things, I have little games I play. Like, I'm not going to leave this room until I've written this book or until I've written this chapter. Or so for the people out there that are struggling to kind of coach themselves through this, the insurmountable failure that happens sometimes. Give us the tips that are in the book. Help us.
Yeah, yeah. So look, tips and tactics are cheap. Tactics are what you do. Strategy is why you do it.
Got
So,
it.
I'm going to give you a link in the show notes for where you can get lots and more tips and tricks than you can ever use, right? That stuff is easy. This app or this little trick or this life hack. What's more important is the strategy. I want to get the picture in your brain so that when the time comes and you say, darn it, why am I not doing what I said I'm going to do? You can look at these 4 basic strategies because there's only 4 steps to becoming indistractable. Step number 1 is to master the internal triggers.
Master the internal
Okay?
triggers.
To understand, mastering the internal triggers, to understand where is this source of discomfort, and then use it, to harness it, to lead us towards traction rather than distraction. You see, there's a myth out there, I think, that is perpetuated, frankly, by the self-help industry, that we are told if you're not happy all the time, how many books do we read with happy in the title?
Yeah.
That if you're not happy all the time, if you're not contented, if you're not feeling great all the time, something's wrong with you. You probably need some kind of pill, right? Something's dysfunctional. That's, for the vast majority of people, bunk. That if you think about it, the species is not designed to be perpetually happy. Quite the opposite. We're designed to be perpetually perturbed. If there was ever a group of Homo sapiens who were happy and satisfied all the time, our ancestors probably killed and ate them. Right? That would not be a good trait to have. You want dissatisfaction to drive you forward, to keep you hunting and creating, inventing, striving, improving your lot in life. So what I want people to remember is that feeling bad is not bad. Okay? It's human. It's normal. And in fact, it's the fuel that can drive us forward. We have to feel discomfort in order to get us to do anything and everything in life. It's about how do we deal with that discomfort. Do we escape it with booze, news, Facebook, football? Do we try and get our minds out of current reality? Or do we use it as the rocket fuel to propel us towards traction? Use that discomfort to move you ahead. And I tell you exactly the tactics for how to do that. But that's step 1. Let me go through the 4 steps, and then we can dive deeper into any one of these that pique your interest.
Absolutely.
So that's number 1. So it's master the internal triggers. Step 2 is about making time for traction. Making time for traction. In the 5 years it took me to write this book, I talked with hundreds of people. And there was one very surprising practice that everyone I talked to who didn't struggle with distraction did, and everyone who did struggle with distraction did not do. And that practice was to keep a well-defined schedule. And it turns out that 2/3 of Americans don't keep any sort of schedule whatsoever, and even the 1/3 who do, 99% of them don't keep it properly. I would speak to people who struggle with distraction, and they would tell me about how distracted they were and how they couldn't get anything done. It seemed like their kids want this and their spouse wants that, and did you see what happened in the news today? And this happened on Twitter, and my boss, I just can't get anything done. And then I would say, well, what did you plan to do with your time? And they'd say, well, look at my to-do list. Look at all these things I have to do that I didn't get done. I said, no, you didn't hear the question. I asked, what did you plan to do with your time? Show me your calendar. And they'd kind of sheepishly take out their phone and they'd show me their schedule. Let me tell you, it was always blank. Maybe there's a dentist appointment or a meeting on there, but for the vast majority of the day, it was blank. So here's the rule. Here's what I want you to remember. Listen super carefully. You cannot call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. You can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. If there's lots of white space in your day, I have no sympathy.
Right.
Everything's going to distract you. The news, the stock market, the sports scores.
I have a question. I have a question for you, Mr. Nir, because I think somebody out there would get mad at me if I didn't ask you this. I'm like a slave to our listeners here, but this is what they want. I know they want me to ask this because I've met so many of them in our conferences. For me personally, right now, I'm calling you at it's 1:18 Central. We're on the call. You're on the call. I'm on the call. I'm mentally present. You're mentally present. It's crazy. This idea that you're focused, I'm focused, we're all focused, which means my phone is off, right? So my phone is off right now. And I don't feel bad about it. I do not feel bad about it. But somebody out there is going, okay, I'm buying into the system. I'm going to make a calendar. I'm going to be intentional. But they're partnered with somebody. Whether it's a relationship partner or a business partner who doesn't respect the 1 hour they have blocked off to interview Burge Najarian, or to interview Nir Eyal, or to interview Wolfgang Puck, or whoever we may have on our show. They don't respect it. So what would you say? 'Cause luckily, my wife does respect it, and my employees do respect it. But what tip would you have for somebody who's made the calendar and the people around them just don't seem to respect it?
It's a really great point, because look, I'm not naive enough to say that just because you're indistractable, everyone around you will be indistractable. That's just not the case. So, half of the book is about what you personally can do.
Yeah.
The other half of the book is what do we do in these various environments and people we interact with. So there's a big old section on how to raise indistractable kids, how to have indistractable relationships, and how to build an indistractable workplace.
Yep.
And so here's the big takeaway for this section on how to build an indistractable workplace, is that the problem of distraction in the workplace is a symptom of cultural dysfunction. Distraction is a symptom of cultural dysfunction because if you can't talk about this problem of distraction, I got news for you. You got all kinds of other problems. Distraction's not your key problem. The key problem is that you can't talk about this problem, because here's the thing. Nobody likes working with constant distraction.
True.
Nobody's at their best, and we all know this. So if you can't talk about this problem and tackle it, the real problem is that you can't talk about the problem. And when people sit down together without fear of getting fired, in this section of the book, I talk about psychological safety, this well-established research that shows that one of the most cancerous part of the modern American workplace is that so many people work in places where they can't raise their hand and say, something's not working out here. We should talk about this.
True.
And if you look at every case of corporate malfeasance, whether it's the Boeing 737 MAX disaster all the way back to Enron and Tyco, every single company where you see these massive disasters, the culprit is always the same thing. It's not the people per se. It's that the people who knew about the problem were told to shut up. We're told to sit down and not talk about this problem. That's the problem. And when people can't, so the solution, of course, is to give people the psychological safety to talk about this problem. And it turns out that when people do this, so I profile in the book Boston Consulting Group, who I know from personal experience, I used to work there. They used to have a very hard-charging, 24/7 workplace culture where people were always expected to be on all the time. And they had, because of a result of this, they had very high employee turnover. And I was one of those employees that left because it was just too much, this culture was not sustainable. Today, it's consistently ranked by the employees on Glassdoor as one of America's top places to work, and they've dramatically reduced employee turnover because they gave people the opportunity to talk about this problem in a regular meeting, in a regular session. So that changed everything. So it's not about adopting somebody else's rules. I see a lot of companies do this. Let's do meeting-free Fridays or no email Wednesdays. That never works, because that's not the real problem. The real problem is that people can't talk about the problem. And once they talk about the problem, they can start implementing these tactics for themselves.
You are the inventor of the word indistractable, by the way. And I'd like to ask you about this a little bit here, going back to the beginning of the book. You are a kind of a writing partner or a writing buddy of Mark Manson, the guy who wrote The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F, who we just interviewed on the show. He's monster best-selling author. You guys are writing buddies, if I understand that. Like, where you guys actually get together in one room and write at the same time. Am I getting that right?
That's right. And so that's actually one of the techniques that I talk about in the book. It's actually step 4. Let me get back to that, actually.
Yeah, let's do it.
So it has a place in the model. Step number 3, which you asked about earlier that I didn't get to, is about hacking back external triggers. Because this has to do with the pings, the dings, the rings, all of these things in our outside environment, including, it turns out, the number one source of distraction in the modern American workplace is not the phone, it's not the computer. The number one source of distraction is other people. 80% of survey respondents, right? You probably saw that one coming. 80% of survey respondents say the number one source of distraction, particularly for people who work in open floor plan offices, is other people. And so what do we do about this, right? And so I tell you how to hack back all of these external triggers. I tell you how to hack back your phone, your computer, Slack meetings, real life meetings, and of course, the open floor plan office. And so let me just give you a taste of what to do here. Inside every copy of the book is what's called a screen sign. It's a piece of cardstock, this big red piece of paper that you fold into thirds and you put it on your computer monitor. This goes back to your question of what do I do if I'm indistractable but other people keep distracting me? Well, if you put this on your computer monitor, and people have started using this all over the world now. I get pictures from people every day using this, and it works like a charm. You put this big honking red sign that says, I'm indistractable at the moment. Please come back later. Now, you don't use this all day. You don't want to be antisocial. But for that time in your day when you need some time to think, you need some time to focus, you put this on your computer monitors. And if you work in an open floor plan office, people see it and get the message. Right? So that's a very, very effective way to hack back. And then per your question about Mark, so that's the fourth step. The fourth step is called prevent distraction with pacts. Now, pacts are pre-commitments. They're promises you make to yourself or to someone else. So Mark and I, for a good chunk of writing both of our last books, we sat next to each other at my home office. He would come over, and we would work together for a set period of time. Now, anyone can do this. If you want to sit down with a work colleague and say, okay, for the next 45 minutes, an hour and a half, however long you need to do your focused work, we're going to keep each other accountable. Now, we weren't looking over each other's screens, but having that other person right next to you also being focused can be a great way to make this promise, this accountability pact. Now, a lot of people say, yeah, but I don't feel comfortable doing that with someone at work, or maybe they work from home. Well, ironically enough, the solution to tech distraction can oftentimes be better tech. And so there's a wonderful technology that I use all the time. In fact, I love the company so much I invested in it. And it's called FocusMate. And FocusMate, what you do is you go onto this website, focusmate.com. You pick a time when you need to do focused work, and you say, okay, 9 o'clock, I'm going to get started. And this is particularly awesome for people like me who have trouble getting started, right? So, I used to say, okay, 9 o'clock, 9:15, 9:20, and I still hadn't started on that big task I needed to do. Well, with this, I know I have to get started because somebody on the other end is waiting for me, and they're going to give me a bad review if I don't show up. But when I do show up, I see them on a little video monitor. They see me, and we say, okay, what are you working on? What are you working on? Go. And for the next 45 minutes, we work without distraction. So there's a lot of tools out there for entering these pacts. And there's other types of pacts as well. There's actually 2 different types of pacts that I didn't discuss that can also help us to stay on track.
I have got just a boatload of follow-up questions for you. So I'm gonna fire them off. We'll go into like a high-octane bonus round here, and I'm just going to hit you up with – I know you have a lot of these answers because you've done so much research over these past 5 years while you've been crafting this book. So my first question is where is your office located? I'm not looking for the home address. I'm just saying, where are you in New York? Where are you guys located?
Yeah, I'm in New York City. Okay,
so you and then when you and Mark are in a room, how big is this room?
Oh, it's a converted closet.
Really?
It's I don't know, like maybe 6 foot by 10 foot.
And do you listen to music while you're writing, or you write in silence?
I typically listen to. I don't like listening to music with words, so I have an app called Endel, Endel, that makes this kind of ambient music nonstop in the background. And the only reason I do that is to kind of tune out other potentially distracting noises.
I feel like there are some external triggers that I have seen my clients cut out, some of them digital, some of them not, and I would like to go through a laundry list and get your take on these things. So one is turning off push notifications. In your book, Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life, what is your take on push notifications that notify you, every time a piece of mail gets delivered, every time that your alarm goes off, every time an email comes in, every time a Facebook update happens, every time an Instagram happens, every time a tweet comes in, every time it's an overwhelming list. What is your thought about the push notifications?
Yeah, so this is where I'm going to have my Marie Kondo moment, right? So what sparks joy? My question is it serving you or are you serving it? That's the critical question. It's not about saying technology is evil or push notifications are evil. Push notifications can be great if they help you do an act of traction rather than distraction. So when I'm with my daughter, I don't want push notifications because I have planned to be with my daughter, right? Now, I leave the phone on so that if my wife calls me in an emergency, that I can see that it's her calling. But I don't have Facebook notifications on. I don't have email notifications on. I don't have all the other stuff on because it's not serving me in that period of time. A great feature that a lot of people don't know about, but actually comes built into almost every device these days, is called Do Not Disturb While Driving. And with Do Not Disturb While Driving, again, almost every device has it already. If you don't know how to use it, just Google it. But here's how it works. Basically, you turn this on, and if someone calls or texts you, they will receive a reply that says, I'm sorry, I can't talk right now. I'm driving. Mine says, you can customize it. Mine says I'm indistractable, so I can't talk right now. I'm indistractable. If this is urgent, text me with the word urgent. Okay? So if it really is, oh my God, you have to call me right away, the house is on fire, you can type in urgent, and then the call or the text message will come through. But when I'm doing something where I don't want distraction, I'm writing, I'm with my daughter, I'm doing something that requires my focus, I can turn on Do Not Disturb, and then everything else is blocked out. So it's helping me towards doing what I want to do, traction, rather than allowing me to get distracted. So it's really about asking yourself, is it serving you, or are you serving the external trigger?
Now, this is going to get a little mean, I'm sure, but we'll see what happens. Most of the listeners who listen to this show own a business or want to at some point. That's kind of our tribe, our audience there. And, Inc. magazine has research that shows that 85% of applicants just make stuff up on their resume. The U.S. Chamber now shows that 75% of employees in the big box stores, they tend to borrow things from the workplace and tend to forget to bring them back, that whole thing. So there are certain people who are not necessarily the best fit in a workplace. What is your take on the distractible people in your life, the people who are causing the distractions in your life, the people that cause, because for me, I own multiple companies and have hundreds of employees between all of them. And so for me, I've always found it easier to address the person directly, let them know, hey, let's stop the whatever, stick within the org chart, stop doing the thing or whatever. And if there are certain people I find that they're not coachable. So I have to remove those people from my life sometimes. What would you say to listeners out there that have one guy in their office and he just likes to cook tuna fish in the microwave and the smell wafts throughout the building and he just loves to always be late, and he loves to fire off a barrage of all caps, those big emails, the ones that are like 2-page pontifications about the workplace. Is there a time to, sometimes let somebody go if they're the cause of the distractions?
Yeah. I mean, if there's someone who's not a good fit for the company culture, the company mission, that if it's not somebody who's offering value to the company, sure, yeah, I think that is somebody that there's nothing that's I think we have laws that allow us to fire at will sometimes because sometimes people aren't a great fit. Now, when it comes to distraction, I rarely see that the problem is the employees. Typically, it's management, and I'll tell you why. I've been hired to do thousands of workshops and presentations about how to help, with my first book about how to build habit-forming products, and now with the second book about how to control your attention and choose your life. So many times I will be giving presentations about distraction and why focus improves company output and improves employee well-being, happiness, all this good stuff that it can increase in one's life. And yet in these meetings, if anybody is distracted on their phone, guess who it is?
The managers?
What's that?
The managers?
Of course, no, more than the managers. It's the big boss.
Oh, the big boss.
It's not the Gen Z or the Gen Y or the Gen X or whatever. It's not the young folks. It's always the big boss.
I agree with you.
The big boss who wants to show everybody how important he or she is because I just got these emails that are super important. I can't be bothered with this. And so that permeates an organization, right? Culture flows downhill. Everybody sees that, and they learn from it. It becomes a secondhand smoke effect where people, they also think to themselves, well, if the big boss is checking his email or her email, does that mean I should be checking my email? Maybe the email they're sending is to me, and I need to get on that right away. And so that tends to be what permeates this terrible workplace culture that is really damaging our work environments. It tends to be from the big boss, unfortunately. And the good news is, it can also be improved by what the big boss does, right? So if you show others what it means to be indistractable, if you set the example, if you are indistractable yourself, that's how we show our employees how they can do it themselves.
Let's dive back into time blocking for a second, and let's pretend that you and I have sat down and we've agreed on this diabolical idea that your family is as important as your finances, and your fitness is as important as your friendships. So we've just figured out that faith, family, finances, fitness, friendship, and fun, they all have a place in our life. So let's talk about faith and family first. Do you think we should block out time for family, or should we just give them what's left?
Absolutely. I mean, look, this is a pillar of becoming indistractable, because when I say time blocks your day, I'm not saying just for productive work-related tasks. Quite the opposite. That we need to look at our time in terms of our values. And the goal here should be to turn our values into time. That's what we want to do here. Turn our values into time. When we think about our stuff and how we protect our stuff, whether it's alarms on our homes, whether it's security systems in our cars, we put our money in vaults, in bank accounts so that they're safe. But when it comes to our time, sure, come on over, take as much of it as you want.
Yeah,
What happened in the news? Oh, sure, interrupt. What did the Kardashians do? Oh, yeah, sure, take that time. What does my boss want? What does my kids want? Sure, take as much time as you want. And that is the only asset that everyone on the face of the earth, no matter how much money you have, everyone, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and everyone else, all get the same amount of time, 24 hours per day. And yet many of us just give it away for free whenever anyone wants it. And so we have to start protecting our time, starting with our values. And so there's 3 life domains. At the center, the most important is you. If you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of others. So the first thing I want you to do, instead of making, a big lofty plan for a 5-year goal or a vision board or the regrets of the dying, how about we just start with next week? Okay? For next week, how much time do you need for you? Whether that's time for prayer or meditation or exercise or a bedtime, right? We tell our kids, you got to get to bed on time, but we're hypocrites. What about our bedtime? We know that sleep is absolutely essential for proper health and mental well-being. So do you have time on your schedule to do something you know that you want to do for yourself, mainly getting proper sleep? Now, I'm not telling you that your values should be the same as mine, but whatever your values are, you need to make time for those values on your schedule. Now, even for fun things, by the way, if part of your values include, look, I want to watch football. I want to go on Facebook. I want to enjoy YouTube a little bit. No problem. There's nothing wrong with any of that stuff. But make that time on your schedule in advance. So you're not using it when you're feeling bad or lonely or bored or indecisive. You're not using it as an escape. You're using it intentionally. That becomes something that you planned to do with your time. Anything else would be a distraction. So you can turn distractions into traction by simply planning for them. So that's the you domain. The next domain is the family domain, or the relationships domain. The relationship domain includes things like family and friends, etc., your community. And I think this is a big reason why we are in this loneliness epidemic these days. Psychologists tell us that loneliness is as detrimental to our health as smoking and obesity, and that we are in the middle of this loneliness crisis in this country. And the reason we are going through this loneliness crisis is not because of Facebook or Twitter. Social media didn't do this. In fact, Robert Putnam wrote about this in the 1990s. He wrote a book called Bowling Alone. And in the early 90s, he noticed that there was a collapse in the number of organizations around the country that held time on people's calendars. What type of organizations? The bowling league, the key club, the church group. Things that hold time on your calendar to be with other people. Listen, knowing other people and having them know you is a fundamental human need. We need that for our psychological and physiological well-being. But if you don't plan that time with your friends, with your families, with your loved ones, with your community, it's not going to happen. So that time needs to be held as well. And then finally, in the last domain is called the work domain. And so this comes last. Most people put this one first, but in fact, I argue it comes last. First, you need to take care of living out your values for yourself, then your relationships, and only then your work. And so this is where we ask ourselves, how do we split our day between reactive work and reflective work? You see, reactive work is responding to all the pings and dings, the meetings, the phone calls, the emails. If you're in a call center, that's all you do, okay? But very few people listening to me right now work in a 100% reactive job. You need time for reflection. Reflection is where we solve those difficult problems. We do long-term planning. We think, for God's sakes, with time for reflection. We have to have that time if we are going to drive our businesses and our lives forward. But how many of us make time to think? When I do these presentations in front of, I'll oftentimes ask, how many of you have a job that requires you to think? Everybody's hand goes up. And then I say, well, how many of you have time in your day to do what your job requires, to have time to think? Almost nobody. I'm telling you, it is a huge competitive advantage If you simply make that time to think without distraction, that is where we do our best work, but it doesn't happen unless we make time for it.
Your book is filled with so much wisdom. Again, the book is Indistractable: How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. But I had a couple just final little nuanced questions I wanted to get into because Proverbs from that controversial book known as the Bible, Proverbs 13:20 reads, "Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm." Tim Ferriss, who is not in the Bible, but he's written some good books. He says, "But you are the average of the 5 people you associate with most. Do not underestimate the effects of your pessimistic, unambitious, or disorganized friends. If someone isn't making you stronger, they're making you weaker." And I could quote Oprah and everybody else who said it in a different way, but the point is you do become the average of the people you spend the most time with. Talk about blocking out time for specific friendships in your life, because now that you are a best-selling author, you've worked with some of the biggest companies in the world that are calling you every day. Your inbox is getting filled up with opportunity, and you're getting all these opportunities. I'm sure when you were first starting out, you thought it'd be cool to have an opportunity, but now you're getting so many opportunities, so many people reaching out. What is kind of your personal filter to decide who to spend time with and what things to do?
This is such an important point. But I think the more important question is not who do you spend time with, because I think many of us have too many choices in terms of who to spend time with. It's, do you make that time? I mean, how many times have you heard from a friend, we should grab coffee sometime, right? Let's go get a drink.
Yeah.
When does that happen? Right? It doesn't happen unless we make those regular occasions to have that time with each other. So one of the things I talk about in the book is this practice I call the kibbutz. And the kibbutz, we just use that term. Kibbutz in Hebrew means gathering. And it doesn't have any necessarily religious connotations. Basically, this is a gathering of couples, because we have these couple friends that we really enjoy spending time with. And we kept saying this stuff to each other. Oh, yeah, let's get together sometime. Yeah, we should totally make that happen. It just didn't happen. So we said, okay, here's what we're going to do. Twice a month, same time, same place, we are going to get together. Why? Because adult friendships are important. So many people stop having friends when they have kids.
True.
And it's destroying us. It's such a bad idea. And so what we started doing is we got rid of all the friction that's involved, right? So every 2 weeks, we get together, same time, same place. Everybody brings their own food. By the way, that's a big deal. So nobody has to do any cooking. You bring your own food. People bring kids. And for that time for each other, what we do, it's almost like an interactive TED Talk. We go around the circle. And every week, one of these 8 people, and these 4 couples, one of these 8 people have the floor. And they talk about something that's on their mind. And we go deep. We don't talk about sports and politics and weather. We talk about what's really going on. So one week somebody talked about, recently it was, somebody had this question around, is it right to force our kids to do something they don't want to do, like learning how to play the piano? Is that a good idea? So then we talked about that for the afternoon. And then another time it was somebody was having trouble at work. They started this company and they weren't really happy there. So they bore their soul and kind of got down to business in terms of what was bothering them. Many of us, we don't have that in our lives, and that's a problem. We need those regular instances. And let me tell you, it wouldn't happen unless we put that time on the books. Now, one additional point I want to make here. Remember how I said earlier that anything can be a distraction?
Yep. One
of the things that we learned can be a distraction are our kids. That when we would get together in this gathering, one of the first times we did this, one of the kids came up and said, "Mommy, Daddy, I hurt myself. I bumped my knee. I need help." And this would throw the entire conversation off track. And so we decided that the kids cannot interrupt. They can listen, but they can't interrupt unless someone's bleeding. Because we need that time as adults to have those interactions with our friends. We want those adult friendships. And just as importantly, we want to model for our kids what an adult friendship looks like. That these people in our life are important to us. These are our friends. They matter to us. And so we need to invest in them. So you can't interrupt for any frivolity. If we put juice boxes in a room, we put some games for the kids to play, and they're fine. And they know this rule. If nobody's bleeding, do not interrupt. And so that's been a great way to block out those external triggers, even when the distraction can be something like your kids.
I have 5 kids, and people think that I am a crazy person when I tell them that I keep my phone off all weekend. They think I'm a unethical, horrible person when I tell them I'm downstairs between 3 a.m. and 9 a.m. uninterrupted working on man projects before I go check in on the fam. And we have a great family. My wife and I have been together almost 20 years. But I think that really is powerful. I think somebody should write that down. I mean, having that weekly, in your case, it's bi-weekly, right? You get together bi-weekly with some couples at the same time, so you don't have to play the schedule chess, right? I mean, it's the same time.
Right.
And the kids can't interrupt you unless someone's bleeding. That is I dare say, Nir, that's a power move. That right there is a power move for somebody out there. That is a power move.
Somebody should write that down in a book, maybe.
Oh, man. Now, here's the deal. You're not looking for book ideas, but I can tell you this because I work with many business owners who say they seek time and financial freedom. And when I help them earn the financial freedom, which we document with case studies and that kind of thing, they find themselves with the financial freedom now to enjoy their time, and they find themselves kind of bored, Nir. You know, they found themselves bored, but also isolated. And I think you just gave a tip for how to keep from being isolated. And I'd like to wrap up today's show by asking you for a tip for all of our very wealthy listeners who have earned a bunch of money, but now their schedule feels empty, and they feel like, gosh, isn't there more to this world? I thought, you know, they've already achieved. A lot of our listeners have achieved their financial goals. How does somebody not feel hollow like the Easter Bunny when they have a schedule that is now free of obligation and it's open to possibilities? How do they? Maybe you've never seen this before. Maybe you have. I mean, it's where someone just feels kind of like the hollow Easter Bunny that their soul seems to be missing as they don't have anything to do. Maybe it's a retired listener who just sold his big company. What advice would you have?
Well, first of all, may you be so lucky to have this problem. This is a very, very high-class problem. But I think part of the solution for anyone, whether you're retired or not, is to pick good problems to fix. That, you know, our values should drive how we spend our time. And what is a value, right? What do values mean? Values are defined as the attributes of the person we want to become. And so this is why we have to turn our values into time. We ask ourselves, once a week, I'll give you a link in the show notes where I have this tool. Anybody can use it. It's free. You don't have to sign up for anything. You don't have to give me your email, nothing. This schedule maker tool. And where I walk people through this online tool that anyone can use to decide how they want to spend their time. Because we talk a good game about, how busy we are. But when you actually decide in advance how you want to spend our time, this is how we hold ourselves accountable. So it doesn't matter your socioeconomic position. Any of us can decide how we want to live out our values by turning our values into time. So whether you're a retiree and you're looking for stuff to occupy your time, if you find yourself being hollow or you're feeling hollow, it's because you're not living out your values. You need to ask yourself, how would the person I want to become spend their time? It's as simple as that. And by picking a good problem, that is one thing the world has no shortage of. We have lots of problems. So pick a fight. Pick a fight for something that you want to fix in the world. And you don't have to be retired to do that, whether that's picking what kind of career you want to pursue, how you want to spend your time. It's about deciding for yourself what brings meaning. How would the person you want to become spend their time? Would it be about, fighting for a political issue, fighting for the environment, fighting to improve people's living conditions, fighting to create a new technology, a new business that brings people value? Whatever it is, pick that fight. And schedule that time to win that war.
Nir, you are an unbelievable author. I appreciate you spending all the time that you spend and invest in putting out your content, your books. You're awesome. And you're also a beautiful man. Are you living entirely off of kale at this point, or what are you doing? You're looking good.
Massages every day, kale wraps, no, not at all.
Unbelievable.
But I will say, you don't know me before. I used to be clinically obese at one point in my life, and I have to say that there's no facet of my life that hasn't been touched by the ideas that I put in Indistractable. Because look, when you are Indistractable, there's so much you can do with your time. I used to be obese. Now I love exercising. For the first time in my life, I used to never understand people say, "Oh, I ran a marathon. I got a runner's high." I have no idea what they're talking about, right? Like I used to hate exercise, but now that I am Indistractable, I do what I say I'm going to do. I'm in the best shape of my life at 42 years old. I've never been in better shape. I've been married for almost 20 years. My relationship is stronger than ever. My relationship with my daughter is better because I'm fully present with her. And it's because a lot of the tactics I know you and I both use around when I do something, I'm fully vested. I'm there. I'm present at what I do. And that makes all the difference for becoming Indistractable.
What time did you wake up today?
7.
7. Is that kind of your default? 7.
Yeah.
In those first 4 hours of your day, what are you doing? First 4 hours.
So it's scheduled every day. I know what I'm going to do. The first 4 hours. So I wake up at 7. I go upstairs. One of my responsibilities is to make breakfast for my family. So from 7 to 7:30, I cook. My daughter comes up at about 7:30. We eat together until 8. I hit the gym from 8 to 9. I shower up. I get ready from 9 to 9:30. And then from 9:30 to 11:30, that's my writing time. So I have a 2-hour block of writing. And then at 11:30, I work from home. So most days, if I'm not traveling, when I'm at home at 11:30, I cook lunch for my family. 12:30, I take calls and meetings. And then the rest of the day is mostly stuff like this, what I'm doing right now.
Well, Nir, a little pro tip for you. If your writing career doesn't work out, I know you've already had best-selling books. If the writing career, if you're looking for a fallback position, you need to be on the cover of romance novels. That's what you need to do. That's your backup position. Unbelievable. I'm telling you, Thrivers, if you look up Nir Eyal right now, look him up. Nireyal. He's in the best shape of his life at the age of 42. I'm serious. This is a thing. You are an inspiration for the Thrive Nation out there, my friend. And thank you so much for investing your time with our listeners here today.
I appreciate it. Thank you for the kind words. And, if you think romance novels should have nerds on their cover, then I'm sure I'd make a great model.
It's an interesting variety of romance novels. Now, it's a kind of a fork in the road, but it's a romance novel. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And now, without any further ado,